me. There's some tough looking dudes down there. You don't want to disagree with them on topics. So shout out to all those people, including me.
All right, so we're gonna bring it back a little local here with some forage fish updates. You know, everyone here, right? We know. I have to explain this to some people, but like, you know, we need healthy forage fish to have good fisheries and have good fishing. But everyone here knows that. Just a real quick kind of briefer. Some forage fish, especially up in New England, aren't necessarily doing too great. Atlantic mackerel, 12% of biomass target in a rebuilding plan, not doing well. Atlantic herring, 21% of biomass target, overfished in its second rebuilding plan. And again, I mentioned this earlier, river herring and shad, there are good runs, you know, north of Boston and into Maine, but down south, not doing well at all. You know, many of these runs have millions of dollars in habitat restoration and are just not seeing any real recovery. Menhaden coast-wide is a bit of a bright spot. The stock is not overfished and not subject to overfishing, but something we'll get into a little bit later. You know, much like science, management is something that's constantly improving. Or that needs to be constantly improved, and menhaden management in the Chesapeake Bay specifically is kind of one of those areas that needs more science and needs you know, some more well-informed management. So again, precautionary management. This is something we've talked about a lot, and you know, a core pillar of ASGA. Removing large volumes of a forage base can have pretty stark ecosystem impacts, and you know, we see it on the water, right? But a lot of it is very poorly understood from a scientific basis. So you know, again, ASGA, we kind of come at these management decisions from a precautionary standpoint, where if the science isn't necessarily there, you know, we believe you should be a little more precautionary in your removals, especially for such a critical ecosystem level species like forage fish. So again, bringing it back local, the New England Council right now is currently, it completed its scoping phase for Amendment 10. And many of you, if you're local up here, likely remember Amendment 8 several years ago that instituted a 12 and 20 mile buffer zone for midwater trawl gear off of pretty much Maine south to Montauk. That rule was struck down by a federal court 2 years ago, more or less because this idea of localized depletion, again, you know, it's hard to prove that by removing a forage base in a specific area, it's hard to prove that just by nature of doing that, the fish are leaving and there's, you know, a demonstrable impact. But regardless, there was a huge public support, you know, commercial, recreational, and ecotourism businesses. It was kind of this, you know, you don't see such a unified community very often, especially in fishery management decisions. But this idea around, you know, kind of better protecting nearshore ecosystems from this midwater trawl fishing gear, which is incredibly efficient, that action had a pretty incredible community of support behind it. So anyways, the New England Council has revisited that issue and that idea of exploring some new spatial management for the directed Atlantic herring fishery. And that action, Amendment 10, is explicitly looking at user conflict. So this picture, it was sent to me from a buddy, Seth Nichols. He's a bluefin tuna guy. The picture cropped out by accident a balloon bait that's literally right above the R's in that picture. And that's how close these 150-foot boats can tow right next to someone fishing. And that is both a physical user conflict and, you know, again, we know when you're doing this level of removals, you're impacting other people too, and that can also be grouped into a conflict. But in addition, the council is exploring optimum yield considerations, which more or less means how does the removal or management of a species, how do you provide the greatest benefit to the nation? So, again, Atlantic herring are, so many different communities are dependent on that. Whale watching, industries that are relying on herring on Stellwagen to, show people how incredible whales are jumping. They're dependent on herring. Obviously, striped bass anglers, tuna anglers, commercial herring anglers that aren't using this destructive gear, they're in that too. So, it's a tough and kind of arbitrary calculation, but there are different considerations you can have for the ecosystem and for other user groups, and that's the important piece. Similarly, river herring and shad incidental catch, that's something we spoke about a couple minutes ago. Oftentimes, river herring school with Atlantic herring, and you can't really tell, when you're towing a football field-sized net between two massive ships, if you're going to pull up a haul full of Atlantic herring or there's going to be a good bit of river herring in it. And we now have science, through genetics work. Ben, somewhere, he was part of some research that kind of linked where some of this river herring incidental catch, exactly where those fish that were incidentally caught, which runs they came from. And a lot of that incidental catch, or an output of one of these studies, found that Block Island Sound was a huge hotspot for the incidental catch of river herring. So again, this new science we have now can better inform this new approach to spatially manage this directed fishery. Let's see, and again, I mentioned Atlantic herring are not doing well, 21% of biomass. Amendment 10 can explore management options that can improve the status of Atlantic herring. And that's not necessarily through cutting quotas or anything, but through spatial management, you can improve the status of the resource. And one of ASGA's main comments was, we can protect spawning habitat, as a spatial management for this fishery. This is something I heard about constantly when doing some outreach on this issue. Pre-spawn and spawn herring will not move off their bottom. They congregate in dense aggregations and they will not move, and they will literally hug that bottom and until they're all scooped up. So you couple the efficiency of a fishing gear like midwater trawl, fishing over these dense aggregations, you can very quickly have a significant impact on a distinct spawning population. And the other piece with spawning, we have learned through some observer data that midwater trawls are not necessarily interacting in the midwater column, like the name suggests. The bycatch observer data is showing tons of demersal fish species, lobsters in some cases, boulders and other. So they are towing right over on the bottom on these herring and then on the egg mats too, which has an impact. And again, being precautionary, understanding where this fishery, this incredibly important forage fishery is, protecting those spawning fish seems like a no-brainer, right? And again, talking about the science, there's some other science on the backside of Cape Cod, another important region. But ASGA has, we submitted comments and again, talked about spawning protections, just the general efficiency of this midwater gear, and wanting to leverage some of this new science that we have on bycatch to inform a precautionary, durable, new spatial and or temporal, meaning like time closure or management for the directed herring fishery, and predominantly the midwater gear. And Tony's going to talk about some menhaden stuff.
So part of, thank you, Will, that was awesome. So